Hey there. Today we're going to learn how to write fractions as decimals. And before we learn how to write fractions as decimals, we need to understand our decimal place values. In this case, I have a decimal place value chart. You'll notice on this side of the decimal point are places that you are familiar with: thousands, hundreds, tens, ones. These are all places that we know already, but what you see after the decimal point are maybe some new place names, and we need to know what these place names are. So the first place that comes after the decimal point is known as the tenths place. Not the tens place, but the tenths place. You'll see there's a THS at the end of tenths. On the second place here, we have the hundredths place. Again, it's not hundreds, but hundredths with the THS. And our third place after the decimal is known as the thousandths place. Again, each one of these places is similar in name to some of the places that we see on this side of the decimal point, but we do have the addition of the THS at the end of each one of those places. If I were trying to read a number with a decimal point in it, for instance, this number right here, the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to simply read the entire number that comes before the decimal point first. So here I have 47, followed by the decimal point. However, I'm not going to read that as a decimal point. I'm going to read that and replace it with the word and. So I would say 47 and then to finish this number, I'm going to read any digits that come after the decimal point in its entirety, followed by the place of the last digit. So in this case, the last digit, 3, falls in the tenths place. So I would read this as 47 and 3 tenths. If I had another decimal in this place, another decimal place in this number, I'm going to do the same thing. Again, I'm going to start by reading the first whole number that I have here in its entirety, 47, and is still going to take the place of my decimal. But now I'm going to read this entire number, which is 36. I'm not going to say 36 tenths anymore. Now, since the 6 is the last digit, it falls in the hundredths place. So I would read this as 36 hundredths. So this whole number we read as 47 and 36 hundredths. Well, sometimes you won't have a whole number to read. Many times you might have a 0 in the ones place, and that simply tells me that I don't have any whole numbers. I'm just dealing with a decimal. So for instance, a number like this wouldn't be read with a 0 or an and at all. This number would just be read as the place that comes after the decimal. So I wouldn't say 0 and 4 tenths. I would just read this as 4 tenths. This number would be read as 48 hundredths. This number would be read as 482 thousandths. So again, if there's a 0 in my ones place, I'm not going to read anything that comes before the decimal. I'm just going to read the numbers that come after the decimal, followed by the place that they're in. So this would be 482 thousandths. Now that's important. If I were to take this back to just the 4, I read this as 4 tenths. Well, you and I know 4 tenths could also be written as a fraction that looks like this. So this 4 tenths and this 4 tenths are actually the same amount. And this is how I would write a fraction with a 10 in the denominator spot as a decimal. 0.4 or 4/10. Let's take a look at a couple examples. Here I have 3 different models that have all been shaded differently. But what I'll notice about each model is that they have all been cut into the same amount. In this case, they have been cut into tenths, and I know that because I can count each piece of my model up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces would give me tenths. So I would say that this fraction right here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the tenths that it has been cut into. So I would say that that fraction is 7/10. This fraction here has also been cut into tenths, but here I have 1, 2, 3 of the 10 shaded. So I would write that fraction as 3/10. And finally, this last one I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10 that have been shaded, so this fraction represents 6/10. Now, again, if I wanted to write these fractions as decimals, well, I need to start with a 0 because none of these fractions have any wholes in front of them. In other words, they don't have any whole numbers that are attached to the fractions, making them mixed numbers. So each one of these fractions is going to start with a 0 and a decimal point. And then in the tenths place, I'm going to write the numerator. So in this case, it was 7/10. I would write that as a decimal point, and it looks like 0.7. But I would still read it the same way that I would read my fraction, as 7/10. Same here, 3/10 would be written as 0.3. But again, it's going to be read as the same way as my fraction. This is 3/10, and this is also read as 3/10. And finally, the 6/10 would be written in the same way, 0.6. So this 6/10 is really the same as this 6/10. Let's look at that example with hundredths this time. Here, my decimal or my models have been cut not into tenths, but they've been cut into hundredths. So this is 10 by 10. So there are 100 unit squares that are on each of these models. So if I were representing these as a fraction, I know that 100 would be in my denominator position for each one of them because they've all been cut into hundredths. Now, all I need to do to know what my numerator is to count the number of squares that have been shaded. In this one, I can see that all but one have been shaded in this first column. And if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that is 9 shaded pieces out of 100 total, or 9 hundredths. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 that have been shaded out of 100. And a quicker way to see that on this one is that if I have a whole strip that has been shaded here, I know that that really equals 10 cubes. So this would be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 1, 2. So this is 72 hundredths that have been shaded. But again, these can all be represented as decimals using the same method that we used before. Now in this case, again, since I have no whole numbers, it's all going to start with a 0 and a decimal point. But now I have to make sure that I have 2 places that go after the decimal point, since I know that this is the tenths place, but this is the hundredths place. I need to make sure that my last digit falls in the hundredths place. In this case, I would put the 9 in the hundredths place, but I can't leave this tenths place blank. I'm going to put a 0 right in front to make this whole number 9 hundredths. In this case, I have 2 digits already in my numerator, so both of those digits would fall in the correct spots here. I would have 13 hundredths written as 0.13, or 13 hundredths. And finally, this last example, 72 over 100 would be written again with 2 decimal points. So I would write 7200 as 0.72, or 72 hundredths.